On 20 different occasions now, I've gone off the grid for over a week. I call these freedom weeks because they allow me to get off the grid, recharge, and relax, which I feel like I could probably use one of those right about now. I'm feeling pretty tired today. Freedom Week is a very unique challenge. It's where you go off the grid and you don't check email, you don't check your Slack or any other kind of DM tool, and you maybe don't even check texts whatsoever. First time I did this was very stressful. It was 2013, I believe, and I had 5 failures with getting an assistant. So I was very hesitant to get a 6th assistant, which I eventually did. It was a time that I really could not risk anything because I'd barely made, I think, $28,000 the year before. I was $250,000 in debt, and I really was exhausted from just the grind of 70 and 80-hour work weeks as a solopreneur. I was actually a marketing consultant at the time. So I had failed again and again, and I think a big issue why is because I kept trying to go overseas. I kept trying to pay $5 an hour. I was hiring the first assistant who applied. I didn't have any kind of vetting process. I wasn't using work tests, just a comedy of errors. So everything changed when I was standing in the shower one day and I had a classic shower thought, and this question came to my mind. And the question was, if I was legally bound to being with my next executive assistant for 3 years, what would I do differently? That's a bit of an absurd question, right? Like typically we're not required to stay with an assistant for 3 years by law. But it was a very productive question because it got me thinking very, very differently. And I believe it's Albert Einstein had the quote that the thinking that created the problem situation is not the thinking that's going to create the solution. So reflecting on this odd question, what would I do differently if I was legally bound to being with my next assistant for 3 years? I started scribbling down my answers. And so my answers were, if I was stuck with someone for 3 years, couldn't fire them, couldn't reassign them, I probably wouldn't hire overseas. I probably wouldn't hire the first person who applies. I would build a hiring funnel, and on I went until I had a list. It was probably, like I said, 20 to 30 items. Then I felt a little bit guilty. I felt guilty that I was asking this negative question, like if I'm stuck with this assistant for 3 years. So I flipped it around and I said, what would I do differently if I got to be with my next assistant for 3 years? I had no concerns of them leaving, 0 flight risk. We know it's going to be a great time. We know it's going to work out wonderfully. What would I do differently? And I thought about that question, and I thought to myself, well, I would probably want to get to know them as a person. I'd want to know the name of their kids and their dog and their personal goals and life aspirations. Probably want to create a really amazing onboarding process so they had an incredibly warm welcome. I made a great first impression on them, and they built a ton of momentum right from their earliest first few days working with me. I'd probably also be a very thoughtful delegator. Like I wouldn't just throw them in the deep end and say, you figure it out. I'd be a thoughtful coach. I would also be very responsive if they ever needed help. I mean, it would be worth coaching them and training them because I know they're going to be there for 3 years, right? So I kept making that list, and that list was also about 20 to 30 items. So then I pushed back from my desk and I burst out laughing because I'm looking at these 2 lists. I hadn't done a single thing from either of these 2 lists with my previous 5 assistants. No wonder I had failed. So despite the fact, again, that I was very in debt and I barely made any money and I was totally exhausted, I took the risk of hiring someone domestic. And I used this first list of my 3 years if I was stuck with my assistant list, don't hire the first person who applies, hire domestic, et cetera, et cetera. And that became actually my hiring funnel. And then I realized that the second list, have a great onboarding process, be a thoughtful coach, be very responsive, never miss any weekly meetings. All of that was basically my leadership method. So I put those 2 things into place, and I actually generated over 200 applicants. Of the 200 applicants, the top candidate who came from all of it was a woman from Indiana who had never worked online before, had never worked in my kind of company before, and had never even been an assistant before. And I'm thinking about this and I'm like, how can this be that this person who seems completely unqualified is my top candidate? I was that close to disqualifying this person. But then it dawned on me that I'd been pretty unsuccessful with my first 5 hires, and maybe my hiring instincts weren't all that sharp. So you know what? Let's give this a shot. So I hired her part-time, and I handed her just 3 tasks to start, very modest tasks. It was uploading blog posts, uploading podcast episodes, and sending invoices to clients. That's it. Very, very simple. But you know what? Because she was domestic, it meant that there was no issues with culture. There was no issues with language. There was no issues with time zone. Because she and I both had said from the very get-go, right from the interview, before I even hired her, we both confirmed we both wanted a long-term relationship. I confirmed that she wanted to work in my company. She wasn't a freelancer with like 10 clients. I confirmed that she wanted to be an assistant. She wasn't like a closet entrepreneur trying to like learn to do something else, or this wasn't just something to pass the time until grad school started in the fall. So I knew that she wanted a long-term opportunity and she wanted to be a great assistant. And so no wonder she picked up everything so quickly, right? So after she picked up those first 3 tasks, which just took her a few days, she freed up my time by a few hours. Now, with those free hours, I did not go and watch Netflix. No. I found the next 3 tasks to delegate to her. I packaged those up nicely, put a little training together, handed that off to her. And guess what? Again, she's a higher level assistant. She knocked those off my plate as well. And so I went 3 more tasks, 3 more tasks, 3 more tasks. Before I knew it, I consistently had like 5 to 10 hours of free time every single week. Now, I did not use that time, again, to like take a day off or go golfing, okay? I use it to reinvest into my business. And pretty soon, my assistant had taken more and more off my plate and I was hiring her for more and more hours. I needed to make more money so I could keep hiring her for even more hours every single week. Now, the fastest way that a service-based business or probably a product-based business can make money is to actually just go back to your past customers and ask them if they'd like to buy again. So that's what I did. At the time I had a marketing agency and I went back to my current clients and I said, hey, we've got these marketing projects going. I've always wanted to do this other marketing thing for you. I think if we did it, you'd end up finding some new customers. It'd be a great slam dunk project for us to work on. And so my clients, because they're my current clients, they know me, they like me, they trust me. We're in regular communication all the time. They said, great, well, what would that cost? And so I'd give them a quote, a few $100s, something like that. And they all said yes. So guess what? Now I had new money. I could hire my assistant for even more. So now she's working even more hours, taking even more off my plate. And now that allowed me to go and gain some new skills. So I paid to be in some higher level courses. I learned how to do some higher level things, solve some bigger problems for my clients. That allowed me to increase my hourly rate. So I was at $40 an hour, I went to $50 an hour, then $100 an hour, then $250, then $500, quite quickly, actually, as I got better and better and better. Took that money, put it back into my assistant, and she got better and better and better as well. Pretty soon, she was not just taking over tasks in my business, she was taking over projects. And before long, she went beyond projects to really kind of owning whole areas of my company. It was remarkable. And to be clear, it was just me and her in the business, just the two of us for quite a long time. So as she keeps getting better and better and better, and I start making more and more money, and I start having more and more time, I start thinking about delegating the holy grail, email. Oh my word, email. If I could just get email off my plate, that would be a massive game changer. So I thought about it and I thought, I got to do it. The President of the United States of America does not answer his own email, and therefore it must be possible. Even if improbable, it's still possible. I don't think that Phil Knight at Nike or Warren Buffett answers all of their own email either. So if it's possible, I want to see if it's possible for me. So it took weeks of building up the courage because I was terrified to do it. But one day I approached my assistant and I said, I would like to try delegating my email inbox to you. Could we do that? She said, sure, absolutely. Now, keep in mind, she and I had built some trust, right? It'd been many months we'd been working together. She had a lot of familiarity around my business because she'd been in it. She was already interacting with our clients a little bit. She was definitely interacting with our back office, our products and services and everything. So she had a good sense of the world that was the business. And so for her to now be in my inbox, she would already have a lot of knowledge of what does this acronym mean, or what is that product, or who's this person. So we did it. We got down to business. It was clunky. It was slow. It was agonizing at times to go through. And it was a real drag for me to figure out, like, how do I actually delegate my email inbox? But we did it. It took probably about 15 to 20 hours of training, but we made it. And I will tell you that it was such a relief. When I think about when I originally handed off my inbox to her, I was like, my hand was literally shaking with fear. And after 1 week of her taking over my inbox, I was still a little bit anxious. Like nothing bad had happened, but I was so cautious to declare victory. 2 to 3 weeks after that, when nothing bad had happened for basically 3-4 weeks, and she was doing a great job, and I was, for the first time in my adult life, waking up in the morning and there's just a few emails for me to handle. I was like, oh my word, I should have done this 5 years ago. Then I decided that it was time to really, really put our teamwork to the test. And this is where Freedom Week comes in. My girlfriend at the time was quite a successful saleswoman, and she had won top salesperson in the region and was invited to go on the president's trip. And she was allowed to bring one guest, so she invited me to go. And my assistant and I, we had a few weeks head start. We knew this was coming. So I proposed to her that I do this challenge, a Freedom Week, where I go off the grid, I go on this vacation, and I'm not allowed to bring my laptop. I'm not allowed to check email, any kind of direct messages. And in fact, I'd probably leave my phone just like in the safe in the hotel room for the week. And so my assistant and I, we kind of like, we're a little cautious about this idea, but we ended up deciding to do it. So we kind of did our best thinking, like what would have to be true for her to take over the business, not just an inbox, but the business for a whole week. And we got busy. I got busy training her on all the things I think she would need to know how to do. We got her access to all the different tools and documents that I thought that she would need. We did our best. The day of the trip, it was a little nerve-wracking. It was in the middle of winter. I was living in Canada at the time. I now live in Austin, Texas. At the time, I'm living in Edmonton, Canada. And I remember being on the plane and that overhead announcement comes that says, please turn your phones to airplane mode. And this is just as we're about to take off and head to our destination. And I'm sitting there furiously checking my phone one last time. Emails and DMs and text messages and everything, because I know this might be the last time I get to do this for a whole week. So I checked, I turned the phone off, laid back into I call it the time machine. When I fall asleep on planes, I'm pretty good at sleeping on planes, which I really think is a great use of time, sleeping. And we arrived, and the tropical destination was spectacular. It was absolutely beautiful. I put my phone into the safe in the hotel room and enjoyed the beach. The very first morning of the trip, I woke up, and my first instinct was, guess what? Check my phone, right? If you're like me, you have probably had periods in your life, maybe even to this day, where you might be checking your phone before you even get out of bed. Well, I was pretty guilty of that. And suddenly realizing that I couldn't check my phone it kind of gave me a little bit of panic. I won't lie. It was actually quite stressful. So here we were. There's like just a few feet out of our hotel room is this spectacular white sand beach and beautiful emerald waters. It's this paradise, and yet I'm feeling like it's some kind of hell that I just can't get to my phone. How crazy is that, right? How crazy is it that us modern day workers are that wired into our phones, right? But I digress. Day 4 of the trip comes and I crack. Day 4 comes, I go back to the hotel room, I open up the safe, I turn on my phone, and I'm waiting to see this flood of like emergency text messages. I didn't check my email, so I'm glad I didn't do that, but I did check to see if there were other messages. Incredibly, there were none. And I was like, oh, okay. Day 6 of the trip comes, and I'm now feeling so much anxiety that I basically just think like, it's over. Like if I'm screwed, I'm screwed. I'm basically resigned. If it's gonna be bad when I get back, it's gonna be bad. Day 8, we get back to the airport to fly home. I turn on my phone and there's still no emergency text messages, which is very, very confusing to me. And then it dawns on me, well, maybe the reason that there's no emergency text messages is not because there's no emergencies, but maybe there's just bad cell service in this tropical country. And I'm like, oh no, maybe this is worse than I thought. So we flew home. Thankfully, I fell asleep on the plane, got home. I crack open my laptop when I get home. I watch that Gmail progress bar load, and I am bracing myself for a welcome home avalanche of 500 emails. Incredibly, there were only 18. My assistant had handled everything in my absence. All that was left were just those 18 emails. It took me about 2 hours to get them answered. And once I did, I realized that I had just gone on the first vacation in my adult life that I did not immediately regret upon coming back. That was a moment. That was a serious moment. A guy who'd failed 5 times at getting assistance, just gone on an 8-day vacation. And although I did worry about my business, I didn't have to. Since that first Freedom Week trip, which was over a decade ago, at least twice per year, I will go off the grid for between 7 and 10 days. And my business is completely in the hands of my assistant. I do have 5 other people on my team now, so they do other things on the team. But it is really having that right assistant that makes the world of difference. Now, the turning point in my mind was not necessarily when I handed off my email inbox or when I delegated any particular task. It started way earlier than that. In my mind, the moment that changed everything was going all the way back to when I was standing in the shower and I had that shower thought and that question popped into my head. What would I do differently if I was legally bound to keeping my next assistant for 3 years? That single question prompted me to hire someone domestic instead of someone overseas. It prompted me to pay fair market wages instead of trying to lowball. It prompted me to be very careful about how I built my hiring funnel instead of just throwing up a resume. That's what prompted me to look at not 2 or 3 candidates, but like 200 or 300 candidates rather than my old self that would look at 1 or 2. That prompted me to go to professional job posting boards instead of just posting on Facebook saying, hey, does anybody have any recommended assistant that I should use? And on top of that, it prompted me to want to be a great leader, to make sure that my assistant had a great onboarding experience instead of just kind of fumbling and bumbling. Being very thoughtful to pick the right 3 tasks to delegate first instead of just kind of being like, you figure it out. It caused me to be very responsive. Every single time my assistant had a question, I got back to them very, very quickly instead of the old me that was like, I don't want to talk to you except for twice a week. Maybe we can have a 15-minute stand-up or something, right? So I could keep going here, but you can see how by me making all of those long-term minded decisions set me up to not only get a great assistant, but for me to also be a great leader. And we've got a great leader working with a great assistant, and this partnership forms not just of competency, but also of trust, where my assistant's just getting bigger and better and stronger and deeper in their skills. And I myself am more and more free to solve the bigger problems in the business. This partnership just grows and grows and grows. And it's basically just the next logical conclusion to do the email inbox. And then it's basically just like not a big deal to go off the grid for 7 days while my assistant handles everything. And I don't think any of that would have been possible had I been short-term minded. If I would have been thinking kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe I'll try someone for a few weeks, or maybe I'll get them for just like, 2 or 3 hours a week, and like maybe we'll do like a 90-day trial, and like all this hesitancy wouldn't have worked. All of this kind of like amateur hiring, amateur leading, getting an amateur assistant, like I would have gotten amateur results. And I remember just feeling so frustrated after my 5th hire that failed that I hit this moment. I was like, amateur hour is over. I am so done with these half measures and amateur solutions. It's time to go pro. Now, to be clear, like my assistant was not making like $100,000. In fact, it was probably more like half of that. And I also was not hiring her like full time. So it's not that you have to be paying pro level wages or hiring pro level hours. Okay. You don't need your assistant to have an MBA from Harvard or anything like that, okay? It's in how you approach it. Are you approaching this as a pro? And are you making a long-term commitment? You bring that to the table, it is the one or two decisions that solves 1,000 other questions. And that, in my opinion, is what set the stage for me to not only hand off my email inbox and my calendar, but actually hand over my business to my assistant for a full 8 days. Now, did my assistant grow my business in my absence? No, but I didn't need my assistant to grow my business. I just needed my assistant to keep it steady while I was away. And my assistant did that with fireworks in such a beautiful way. So that's really what I discovered is the secret to a Freedom Week. And having done it a couple dozen times now, I can tell you the method really, really works. So if you're feeling exhausted and you've got maybe it feels like it's impossible to ever go off the grid, maybe even take a weekend off, I'm going to encourage you to think about, well, is this a what question or is this a who question? Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan wrote, the fantastic book, Who Not How. And perhaps the thinking or the consciousness or the mindset that you're bringing to the situation is not the consciousness or thinking or mindset that's going to get you the solution. Like Albert Einstein had mentioned all those years ago. If you found this video to be helpful, please do subscribe.